Hi, my name is Kim Guadano, and I'm here on behalf of the Armed Forces Heritage Museum to make an introduction to a videotape. Now you ask yourself, why is it so important to do an introduction like this? Well, we all know it's been about 40 years since the end of the Vietnam War, about 70 years before the end of World War II, and unfortunately people are already beginning to forget the sacrifices so that we could all sit here a free and open and transparent society. So I'm here as a representative of the 430,000 veterans we have in New Jersey, and also, quite frankly, as the proud mom of a future veteran who just graduated from the Air Force Academy, to introduce an incredible story about a hero that would otherwise go unsung without this videotape. And that hero is Howard Brooks. Back in World War II, everybody must know by now about the USS Houston. It went down in the waters of Asia. On that ship was a young Navy man by the name of Howard Brooks. He went into the waters. He was shot at by the Japanese. He's going to tell you his story about how he was captured by the Japanese and spent 3.5 years in an internment camp building the now famous bridge over the River Kwai. It's a story that you have to hear to believe. It's a story that I'm glad the Armed Forces Heritage Museum is going to preserve forever, because if we ever forget the story of Howard Brooks and the people like him, we will forget how it is we can all sit here a free and open society. So thank you to the Armed Forces Heritage Museum, but more importantly, thank you to Howard Brooks, his family, and all of the Howard Brooks in this world who make us the best and the greatest country in the world.
Well, let's begin. Today is the 21st of September, 2015. We are interviewing Howard Brooks, Navy veteran, on his experiences. Howard, you are 96?
October the 30th.
October the 30th.
Another 6 weeks.
You were born in?
East Tennessee. October the 30th, 1919.
1919. And you grew up in East Tennessee?
Yes.
When did you join the Navy, and why did you join the Navy?
Well, I had two older brothers. One joined my oldest brother joined the Navy in 27, and a brother 2 years younger than him joined the Army in 28. Of course, during the 20s, I was growing up. They used to come home on leave, and of course they always had the uniform when they came home, and I kind of liked the Navy uniform better than the Army uniform. And I think that if I had to pinpoint one thing, that would be my reason. But I liked the Navy from what I learned from my brother, really. I joined the Navy September the 3rd, the day Hitler marched in to Poland. And a week later, I was in boot camp. I was advised I was to be transferred to the USS Houston and the Asiatic Fleet.
Where were you when the war began?
Iloilo. And we went into that harbor. We had to wait for a couple officers who were up in Shanghai. And we took these guys aboard, and we got underway. And it was just after dark, not long after dark. Word was announced, you know, all hands, now hear this. We are now in a state of war. Pearl Harbor has been bombed by the Japanese.
When you got underway, you headed south?
We were headed for the port of Surabaya and on the island of Java. I remember as we approached Borneo, you go through, it's called Malacca Straits. We were instructed to go down to Darwin, Australia. And our duty was to convoy ships back up to Java.
Okay. When did you encounter the Japanese initially?
Our first contact with Japanese was February the 4th. I remember at about 9 o'clock in the morning, we counted at least 45 planes. Some of us We liked to go out on the deck and watch. All we had to do was go up one ladder, and we watched the aircraft, anti-aircraft guns.
These were dive bombers?
No, they were two-engine Bettys.
Bettys. Okay.
They were two-engine Bettys. Our damage control officer called. He said, "I need 2 electricians. The number 8 gun ammunition hoist, they're having trouble." So me and another electrician, he says, go check on this. And while we were checking on that hoist, we heard a bomb hit us. We could feel the concussion and the noise it made. We found out later that whole damage control party was wiped out, except me and this other guy. And if we hadn't been up to this repair, we would have been with them. That was the 4th of February, and that was our first action. We were bombed 2 or 3 times after that, but we were never hit. 27th in the morning, we met the Japanese Navy at sea. It's just north, just out of Surabaya, north into the Java Sea. It lasted, way late in the afternoon. And during that time, one of the British ships, the Exeter, was badly damaged. Dutch ships, they were sunk. My ship and the Perth were the only 2 ships that were still in the formation at all. So we cruised to the western end of Java. We went into the harbor and tied up. Well, a little after dark, we got underway. We were going to make an effort to go through the Sunda Straits between Java and Sumatra into the Indian Ocean and try to get to Australia. And the Perth was firing at some vessel. They were firing at a Japanese destroyer, which they had met. And the next thing we knew, we were in the middle of a landing force. All I saw that night was Japanese destroyers. I think for a whole solid hour, we were firing at everything we had on the ship. The only thing we had left was star shells. And we were firing point-blank star shells at Japanese destroyers. Their planes, their SLCs that looked just like ours, were flying over us just like it was daylight. We lasted for almost an hour. But the Perth was sunk about 20 minutes before we were. And their destroyers were so close to us that we could see the ship very clearly. We could see sailors on the ships. And we had taken torpedoes on the starboard side, and we had a big list. The captain announced, "Abandoned ship." I went over and into the harbor, into the water. There was a raft close by, and it was loaded with severely injured guys. So I just caught a hold to the side. To this day, it's hard to believe that it would be done, but those destroyers, those Japanese destroyers, were firing right into the water, right into the guys. You know, and I know a lot of them were killed. Now, our crew was supposed to be 1,100, but we were short, and I think we had 1,068, a number I've always heard. But there was over 700 of those went down with the ship. Perth had about the same percentage of survivors. But I hung on to this life raft, and the next day the Japanese came along in small boats and picked up guys. They came by my raft they looked in it and saw all these injured guys. And, you know, we could see they motioned, keep going, you know, and they didn't bother us. And they did that 2 or 3 times during the day. And I stayed 2 nights in the water. But finally, we got into the beach with that raft. And we just laid there and went sound asleep. Anyway, the next morning, a group of natives were standing around looking. You know, they gave us, I remember they had coconuts and their knives. They gave us coconut water. And we drank that. And finally, they said, Dutch. We see the Dutch army. So we went walking. We hadn't gone far, but this truck coming up the road toward us. It got close. 2 guys were standing in the back and they holding this flag with the big red dot in it. So they took us right to the Japanese truck. We were not Dutch. Anyway, they called it the bicycle camp. It had been an old Dutch army place with a group that had bicycles. So stayed there. Stayed there for about a couple months. We still had what we had when we left the ship. No shoes. I didn't get shoes until after we left Singapore. They hadn't been giving us too much food. And everything they did give us, it was just plain rice, and they made throw some vegetables in it. But that was 3 times a day. It turned out to be that's all we had for the rest of the 3.5 years, rice and soup for 3 times a day. But we were there for a couple months, and they put us on a ship. We went up the Bay of Bengal, up toward Rangoon. As we were about to enter this river, 2 big 4-engine planes, but they were so high we could just barely see that they were 4-engine planes. And they were firing at these planes, but we were looking and they weren't even reaching the planes. But it was encouraging for us to see allies, you know. So they took us into Moulmein, and that was the beginning of the railroad. I know for the first several weeks, all we did was dig, remove that, pile it up. The railroad was laid out, and there were stakes in the ground and lines drawn. After we would build it up, there would be culverts to make out of wood. And there were stones. You would sit down and you would bang rocks all day long, carry them over and put on top of the fill.
As the railroad moved along, the place where you would stay, would that change?
We would move. It started, we started at like 5-kilo camp, then 15-kilo camp, and then 20-kilo camp. But you would leapfrog over each other. It seemed sometimes you'd work at a place only a couple weeks. Then you'd walk for half a day the next day, or maybe all day. They always had natives who made these bamboo barracks that we lived in. You had your little mat, you lay on that. And if you were lucky, you had a blanket to lay on that.
When would you start?
Typical day, we would get up with daylight. Yeah. And the cooks would have the great big pot. It was always the same thing, morning, noon, or night. And you had to be ready to tango, count off. You had to be lined up, hit your knees, sign, and then you're ready to march and start work. At noontime, they'd yell out, you know, stop, you know. They knew a few words, stop, work, lazy. They knew that word very well. It was usually our soup, what they carried out. We'd be lined up, march by, and you had, most of the time, you had like 30 minutes. We worked every day. There was no days off. But working down through the jungle, when we built a railroad along a cliff, or the cliff was one side of it, oh, you worked for days just making a place to anchor the cliff side. The other side, you had to build up. We had to cut the trees, trim them, haul them in. Thank the good Lord for elephants. We had some elephants that lifted those things many places. We were lucky if we got home before dark. We always considered it very lucky because at dark in a jungle, there's no place darker than a jungle at night.
What about medical care and illnesses?
Well, I was lucky. I had malaria a few times. More than one time I was picked up and carried back into camp, but I always got over it. But for medical treatment, I got a gash on my shoulders. I fell at some place where we were working, and it got infected, you know. And Dr. Epstein took care of it. And you know what he did when I stood up by a tree and put my arms around the tree, and two guys held my hands together, and he took his little knife from his pocket, and he sterilized it in a flame of fire there, and he nipped into this and cleaned it out. He just put an old rag around underneath my arm and around over my shoulder to cover this place up. And you know, you had to be careful and keep it covered 100% of the time because of the flies and getting infections. Some of the guys came home with one leg, all because they got a tropical ulcer.
What was the attitude of the guards, and what was the relationship?
I think they were trained to be mean. When we were digging, and a soldier would walk up and see this line here, no good, no good. And they would slap that officer's face like this, you know? And that was hard to take. It wouldn't have taken much for a bunch of us to grab that guard and cut his throat. But you knew if you did that, you would be cut down quick. I tell you, when it come to a loss of freedom, nobody had a greater loss of freedom than those Japanese POWs that worked on that railroad. We knew there was no place to go. Beyond that jungle was the Bay of Bengal.
You know, in a situation like that, it is so easy to become depressed and give up. What kept prisoners going? What kept you going? Because you were there a long time.
In my mind, always, it's not going to be long. They're going to come. It's going to come to an end. And instead of all those Japanese we see out there, there's going to be American soldiers. We knew that there was going to be end to it. Now, we got news from time to time. I don't know to this day. I know that we had a radio in camp and we got some news. We knew that this is going to be over soon. Maybe not tomorrow or the next day. But we knew that it had to be. We knew that was the scheme from the beginning. That they're going to lose some way or the other. And that gave us hope.
When you finally, the railroad was finished and they were gone, what happened then?
When we got to the end of the railroad, where the bridge on the River Kwai was, we heard that they're taking groups, train loads every day, down the peninsula to Singapore. They're going on ships to Japan. A British officer was in charge of us. And he says, well, it looks like we're not going to Singapore. They say that we're going to go over to Saigon Harbor. When we arrived into that harbor, and as we were disembarking from this riverboat, there were carrier planes from an American carrier out in the South China Sea. When they started to come over as we disembarked. So they took us immediately. We crossed the street, only 1 block, and we had to sit down right there. And these planes dived right over us into the harbor, and they sunk every ship in that harbor. And we sat there and enjoyed that.
Saigon, when did you find out that the war was over?
So one day, they called us for muster, and this was a Japanese army officer. But he said, the Japanese emperor has seen fit to end the war. He said, the world does not need any more cruelty that the Americans and the British have brought on all the people. War is no more. You will be going home. You know, when he left, we were in the camp, we never seen another Japanese of any kind anymore. But that day, a big 4-engine plane came in. It wasn't real low, but you could see it good, you know. But they dropped some fairly big things onto the airport. The airport was not far out from the city. Not long after that, come driving into camp in a Jeep were 2 American soldiers. And that Jeep was loaded with candy bars, and I think he had a whole bushel of big bag there of cigarettes, which he dumped out on them. Everybody went crazy.
You have given us a absolutely wonderful memoir of the cruise at Houston and what it was like to be a prisoner of war and to serve valiantly in the Navy. And Howard, all I can say is we are very proud of you. You are, men like you, you know, they use the phrase greatest generation. I think you put great in greatest generation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cruise at Houston. God bless you, Howard.
Thank you.